You ever live in a house that keeps secrets? Not the kind you can see, but the kind that hum quietly under the walls. The kind no one talks about because pretending they don't exist feels safer. I grew up in one of those houses. It was small, quiet, and always smelled faintly of lavender and old books. We weren't rich, but we were comfortable. And my grandfather, he was the heart of it all. He'd lived with us for as long as I could remember. He ate dinner with us every night. He read by the window every morning. He was gentle, polite, and so old that even time seemed to step softly around him. There was only one strange thing about him. Every night after dinner, my father would walk him down the hall, help him into his room, and then lock the door from the outside. No one ever explained why. I never asked. For years, I told myself it was a safety thing, that old people just needed a little extra care. But there's something about silence that lets rot take root. And once you start pulling at the quiet, once you start asking questions, you can't ever go back. This is what I found behind that locked door. And if I could take it back, I would. I never really thought much about the locks on Grandpa's door. They'd been there as long as I could remember. Old brass brackets fitted neatly into the frame, the metal worn smooth from years of use. The skeleton keys sat on a small ceramic dish beside my dad's seat at the dinner table. I grew up thinking it was normal, just another part of our house, like the humming radiator or the crooked picture frame in the hallway that no one bothered to fix. Every night after dinner, Grandpa would fold his napkin carefully, thank my mom for the meal, pat my dad's shoulder, and give me a small nod before heading down the short hall to his room. My dad would follow with the keys. We'd hear the door close, the lock turn twice, a faint metallic click that always sounded heavier than it should have. Then Dad would come back to the table, slip the keys into his pocket, and the conversation would move on. No one ever mentioned it. As a kid, I assumed it was for safety. Grandpa was old, maybe forgetful. Maybe Dad was afraid he'd wander out at night and fall. I never thought about how strange it was that the lock was on the outside. Grandpa had always been old. He spent mornings in the sunroom with his library books, glasses slipping down his nose, a cat curled on his lap. In the afternoons, he shuffled around the garden, plucking weeds, humming softly, touching the tomato cages like they were old friends. He looked like every other gentle old man, the kind of person you could trust with your secrets. My friends thought it was weird that he lived with us. Why not a nursing home, they asked. I didn't know what to say. When they pressed about the locks, I just laughed it off. It's just a family thing, I said. And eventually, they stopped asking. That was the thing about our family. Silence was the closest thing to tradition. It was a Thursday night when something changed. Dinner was chicken stew. Grandpa ate slowly, like always taking small spoonfuls, chewing carefully. Halfway through the meal, he stopped, pressed a napkin to his mouth, and coughed. It wasn't his usual dry little cough. It was deep, wet. When he pulled the napkin away, I saw a dark red bloom across the white cotton. He frowned down at it, folded it again, so the stain disappeared, and kept eating. No one said a word. Mom reached for the breadbasket. Dad asked for salt. The air between them felt like glass, still fragile, ready to break. I kept staring at Grandpa's trembling hands, the way his spoon rattled against the bowl. When our eyes met, he smiled. That same soft smile that always made him look younger. But this time, there was something behind it. Something that looked a lot like pain. That night, I couldn't sleep. The sound of his cough echoed in my head. I lay there thinking about how he slept behind a locked door alone. And for the first time, the thought scared me. What if he needed help and couldn't call for it? What if the locks weren't keeping him in, but keeping something out? Around midnight, I got up. The house was quiet except for the faint hum of the fridge and the creak of wood settling in the cold. The hallway to Grandpa's room was darker than usual. I stopped outside his door and pressed my ear to the wood. At first, there was nothing, just silence. Then I heard it. A soft humming, low and tuneless, almost like a lullaby. His voice trembled, the sound fading in and out. After a while, the humming turned to whispering. I couldn't make out the words. It wasn't English. The rhythm was wrong. The tone uneven, too fast in some places, too slow in others, like a prayer in reverse. My hand drifted to the doorknob. I turned it gently, but it didn't budge. Locked. I stood there for a long moment listening. Then I whispered to myself, tomorrow. I'll find the spare key tomorrow. The next morning, I waited. Mom went grocery shopping. Dad went outside to mow the lawn. The moment the mower roared to life, I slipped into my parents' room. The air smelled like clean linen and old perfume. Sunlight streaked across the carpet. I went straight to Dad's dresser, pulled open the top drawer. Neat stacks of socks, handkerchiefs. My fingers brushed against the back panel wood, smooth, slightly loose. A false bottom. My heart bounded as I lifted it away. There, resting inside, was an old brass skeleton key. The metal was cold, heavy, worn smooth from years of use. I held it for a long time, my chest tight with guilt. I thought about Grandpa's smile, the blood on his napkin, the way Dad's hand always shook after locking the door. I wasn't doing this out of curiosity anymore. I told myself it was love. That evening, Grandpa barely touched his food. When dinner ended, he looked around the table and said quietly, "Thank you for taking care of me all these years." Mom's eyes glistened. Dad didn't look up. I didn't understand why it sounded like a goodbye. The key lay under my pillow that night. I waited until the house went still, until the only sound was the faint ticking of the clock. My hand shook as I held the key, feeling its cold edge press into my palm. The hallway seemed longer than ever. When I reached the door, I could almost hear my heartbeat echo in my ears. I slipped the key into the lock. It resisted for a moment, then turned with a soft metallic click. The air that drifted out was stale heavy, carrying a faint metallic smell. I stepped inside and closed the door behind me. Moonlight bled through the curtains, painting pale bars across the floor. The smell of lavender powder mixed with something damp and wrong. Grandpa sat upright in bed, hands folded in his lap, eyes closed. His chest rose and fell in slow, rattling breaths. "Grandpa," I whispered. His eyes opened. At first, I thought the moonlight was playing tricks on me. His pupils looked pale, milky, unfocused. But then they turned toward me, and he spoke. "You shouldn't have come in," he rasped. His voice was raw, shaking. "I don't have much time left to keep it down." I froze. "Keep what down?" I asked. He didn't answer. His hands began to tremble, and his breath hitched in short, sharp gasps. It started with a sound, a wet, cracking noise from deep inside his throat. His spine arched, his head jerked back against the headboard. For a second, I thought he was choking. Then his jaw began to open, wider and wider. The corners of his mouth split, skin tore like paper. Blood welled up, dark and quick. Something moved inside his throat. A pale shape forced its way out, slick and trembling, a mass of flesh and veins twisting like it was alive. It slid from his mouth, thick cords pulsing and twitching in the moonlight. I stumbled backward, but my foot caught the rug. The thing struck the floor with a wet slap, coiling toward me. When it touched my ankle, I screamed. It was warm, alive. It wrapped around my leg and pulled, dragging me toward the bed. The smell of blood and rot filled the air. Grandpa's eyes rolled back, his voice gurgling around the thing in his throat. "I'm sorry," he whispered. I tried to keep it fed quietly. I tried. The tendrils tightened, pulling me closer. My fingers tore at the carpet, leaving bloody crescents behind. I could feel the suction, the burn where it touched skin. The door burst open behind me. Dad stood there, face white with terror, holding an iron crowbar. Without hesitation, he swung. The metal struck the tendril, spraying dark mucus across the room. Grandpa let out a strangled moan as the mass recoiled, but it surged back out, thicker, hungrier. More of it poured from his mouth, slapping against the walls, the floor, the bed. Dad swung again. One strike hit my leg instead. Pain exploded up my shin, but the coil loosened. I crawled backward, sobbing as he raised the crowbar a third time. His eyes locked on Grandpa's face, and for a moment, I saw the grief. Then he brought the crowbar down on Grandpa's skull. The sound was horrible. Bone-cracking flesh, tearing a wet finality that made my stomach twist. Blood sprayed across the sheets. The creature spasmed, flailing, then collapsed into a quivering heap before slithering back inside his throat. And then, silence. Grandpa slumped forward. His mouth hung open one last time, blood dripping onto his lap. The air smelled of iron and decay. In the doorway stood my mother, holding a ceramic bowl filled with herbs and raw meat floating in something thick and black. Her lips moved silently, a chant I didn't understand. Dad lowered the crowbar, breathing hard. Mom stepped closer, tears streaking her face. She set the bowl on the floor and whispered, "It wasn't supposed to happen like this." We sat at the kitchen table as the sun came up. No one spoke. Grandpa's chair was empty. His bowl still sat there, a half-eaten piece of bread beside it. Dad's hand shook. Dried blood flaked from his knuckles. Mom moved around the kitchen in a trance, washing dishes that were already clean. Finally, Dad looked up. His eyes were red and hollow. "We should have told you," he said quietly. "You didn't deserve to see that." He stared down at his hands, flexing his fingers slowly. "Your grandfather was a host. It's been in our blood for generations. Locking him in kept it contained. It feeds while he sleeps. As long as he stayed in that room, it couldn't spread." He paused, glancing at the clock on the wall. 7:59 p.m. glowed in steady green digits. He pushed back from the table, stood up, and looked toward the hallway. Mom went to him, pressed a kiss to his temple, and whispered, "I'll bring you breakfast." He didn't reply. He walked down the hall, slow and steady. Mom followed the brass key, clutched tightly in her hand. She turned to me before closing the door. Her eyes were glassy with tears, but underneath them, I saw something colder, acceptance. The door closed with a soft click. And then came the lock. I sat alone in the kitchen. The house felt too big, too quiet. The cushion on Grandpa's chair still held the faint shape of his body. The smell of lavender lingered in the air. I stared at the hallway. I didn't need them to explain. I already knew. Whatever that thing was, it didn't die with Grandpa. It didn't die at all. It just needed somewhere else to go. Someone else to hold it down. Now it was Dad's turn, and after him, I think I already know. Last night, I heard humming again. The same tune Grandpa used to hum while he read by the window. Only this time, it wasn't coming from his room. It was coming from mine. That was years ago. The house is quieter now, emptier. Some nights, when the wind hits the side of the house just right, I swear I can still hear the door creak, the old brass lock shifting against the frame. Mom doesn't talk about it. She just keeps the keys close, tucked in her pocket, even when she sleeps. She says it's for safety. I don't argue. I still sit at the table sometimes in the chair where Grandpa used to sit. The indent's still there, faint but real, like he never really left. And sometimes when the lights flicker, I hear it again. That humming, faint, tuneless, drifting through the air like it's searching for something. I try not to listen, but lately, it's been getting louder, closer. I used to think the locks were there to keep him in. Now I think they were meant to keep the rest of us out. Because whatever lived behind that door, it isn't gone. It's waiting